tray shook in Alira's hands as the doors of the great hall swung open, and the smell of burning wine hit her before the sound of laughter did. She had one job tonight: carry the trays and stay out of sight. But the moment she stepped past the golden pillars, she knew something was wrong. Every eye in the hall turned toward her, and not one of them was kind. "Look who decided to walk through the front like she belongs here," a voice called out, sharp as a blade catching torchlight. Alira froze, her fingers tightening around the silver tray, until her knuckles turned pale. She knew that voice. Everyone in Hollow Moon Pack knew that voice. Seraphine stood near the center of the hall, dressed in a gown the color of fresh blood, her dark hair pinned with jewels that cost more than Alira's aunt earned in a year. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that promised trouble, not warmth. Alira lowered her eyes and kept walking. She had learned long ago that the fastest way through a room full of wolves who hated her was to say nothing at all. Silence had kept her safe for 18 years. Silence had kept her alive. But tonight was not an ordinary night. Tonight was the mating ball, the one event that came only once every 5 years, when every unmated wolf in every pack gathered under one roof, hoping to catch the eye of the Alpha King himself. Kings did not choose mates often. When they did, the entire world of wolves held its breath. Alira was not here to be chosen. She was here because the kitchen needed extra hands, and extra hands meant extra coin, and extra coin meant her aunt could buy medicine for the cough that had settled into her chest like a stubborn winter frost. That was the whole of it. That was the only reason an Omega like her had been allowed anywhere near a ball meant for betas and alphas dressed in silk. She moved along the wall, careful not to bump into anyone, careful not to draw attention twice in one evening. The hall stretched wide and tall, its ceiling painted with stars that seemed to glow on their own, and hundreds of candles floated overhead, held up by magic older than any pack alive. Alira had never seen anything like it. She let herself look up for just a moment, just long enough to feel something other than fear. That moment was her mistake. "Watch where you're going," someone snapped, and a shoulder crashed into her side. The tray tipped. 2 goblets of dark red wine slid off the edge and shattered against the marble floor, splashing across the hem of a pale blue gown belonging to one of Seraphine's friends. The hall went quiet, then loud, then quiet again, all in the space of a breath. "She ruined my dress," the girl in blue shrieked, holding the fabric away from her body, as if it had caught fire. "This Omega ruined my dress." Alira dropped to her knees before anyone told her to, because she already knew what came next. She reached for a cloth tucked into her apron and began wiping at the stain, her hands trembling, her face burning with a shame that had nothing to do with what she had actually done wrong, because she hadn't done anything wrong at all. She had simply looked up at the stars. "Leave it," Seraphine said, stepping closer, her voice honeyed and cold at once. "Let her clean it properly, on her knees. That's where Omegas belong anyway, isn't it?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not everyone laughed. Some looked away, uncomfortable, but no one stepped forward. No one said a single word in her defense. Alira kept scrubbing at the wine stain, refusing to let the tears gathering behind her eyes fall in front of a room full of wolves who would only see it as more proof that she was weak. She had grown up being told that Omegas were the lowest rank a wolf could hold, lower than servants, lower than strangers passing through. She had been told this so many times that some cold, quiet part of her had almost started to believe it. Almost. But there was another part of her, buried deep, that remembered her mother's voice from when she was very small. A voice that used to whisper, "You are not what they say you are, Alira." Never forget that. She barely remembered her mother's face anymore, only fragments, a warm hand on her hair, the smell of lavender, a soft song sung late at night. Her mother had died when Alira was 6, and her Aunt Maribel had raised her since, working double shifts at the tavern to keep them both fed. Maribel had warned her about tonight. "Keep your head down," she'd said, packing Alira's uniform into a worn bag. "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look anyone in the eye. Get through the night, and we'll have enough for the healer." Alira had promised she would be careful. And now here she was, on her knees in front of half the packs of the kingdom, scrubbing spilled wine, while laughter rained down on her like stones. "That's enough," a new voice said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even particularly forceful. But something about the way it moved through the room made every single conversation stop at once, the way a candle flame stops flickering the instant a door closes. Elira felt the change before she understood it. A shift in the air, a weight pressing down on every wolf in the hall at the same time. She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. The Alpha King stood at the top of the short marble steps that led into the hall. Though she hadn't seen him arrive, hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't sensed him the way she always sensed powerful wolves entering a room. He was simply there now, tall, dark-haired, dressed in black, that made no attempt to compete with the golds and reds around him. And yet somehow, he was the only person in the entire hall that mattered. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and unreadable, and right now, they were fixed not on Seraphine, not on the girl in the ruined blue dress, but on Elira, still kneeling on the cold marble floor with a wine-stained cloth in her hand. Kale, the Alpha King of all the packs. She had heard his name spoken with reverence and fear her whole life, had heard stories of battles he'd won before he was even 20, of enemies who surrendered the moment they felt his presence, of a wolf so powerful that other alphas bowed without being asked. She had never expected to see him. She certainly had never expected him to be looking at her. "Your Majesty," Seraphine said quickly, her voice suddenly sweet as sugar, dropping into a graceful curtsy. "Forgive the disturbance. The girl was clumsy, that's all. We were simply having her clean up her own mess." Kale did not look at Seraphine. He walked down the steps, slow and deliberate, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts for a blade. He stopped a few feet from Elira, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that her wolf, the quiet, instinctive part of her that rarely stirred anymore, suddenly sat up and paid attention. "Stand up," he said to her, gently this time. Elira hesitated. Every rule she had ever learned told her not to draw more attention to herself, not to make eye contact with an alpha, especially not with the king, but something in his voice made her obey without thinking, her legs shaking slightly as she rose to her feet, the wine-stained cloth still clutched in her hand. Up close, he was even more overwhelming than she had imagined, not because of his size, though he was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, but because of the sheer stillness of him, like a mountain that had decided to stand in the middle of a crowded room. "What is your name?" he asked. The hall was utterly silent now. Even Seraphine had stopped smiling. "Elira," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elira Vance, Your Majesty." Something flickered behind his gray eyes, something she couldn't name, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Elira Vance," he repeated, as though testing the shape of her name in his mouth. Then he turned toward the crowd, and his voice, when he spoke again, filled the entire hall without him raising it at all. "I have attended a great many gatherings in my life," he said. "I have seen wolves challenge each other for territory, for rank, for pride. I have never once seen a room full of grown alphas and betas find entertainment in humiliating someone kneeling before them." No one spoke. No one dared. "This ball," Kale continued, "was called so that I might find a mate among the packs gathered here tonight. I find myself already less interested in most of you than I was an hour ago." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Seraphine's face had gone pale beneath her careful makeup. "Your Majesty," she began, "I only meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," Kale said, and though his tone stayed even, there was something underneath it now, something with teeth. "Attend to your dress elsewhere." Seraphine's mouth opened and closed. Then, with as much dignity as she could gather, she turned and walked away, her friend in the ruined blue gown hurrying after her. The rest of the hall seemed unsure what to do with itself, wolves shifting on their feet, whispers starting up in corners like small fires catching. Kale turned back to Elira. Up close, she noticed the faintest line between his brows, as though he too were trying to understand something he could not quite name. "You may return to your duties," he said quietly, only to her. "No one will trouble you again tonight." He didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked back toward the raised platform at the far end of the hall, where the pack leaders and elders were seated, leaving Elira standing alone in the middle of the floor, the tray forgotten at her feet, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the whole room could hear it. She didn't understand what had just happened. She didn't understand why the most powerful wolf in the kingdom had stopped, in front of everyone, to defend an Omega girl he had never met. But as she bent down to gather the shattered pieces of glass from the floor, she caught him glancing back once, just once, before he took his seat among the elders. And for reasons she could not explain, her wolf, silent for years, stirred inside her chest like something waking up after a very long sleep. Word of what happened in the great hall spread through the servants' quarters before the ball had even ended. By the time Alira slipped into the narrow hallway behind the kitchens to catch her breath, 3 different maids had already stopped her to ask if it was true, if the Alpha King himself had really spoken up for her, if he had really sent Seraphine of the Ashwood line walking away with her head down. Alira didn't know how to answer. She barely understood it herself. "You should be careful," said old Wren, the kitchen's head cook, as she handed Alira a cup of water. Wren had worked in Hollow Moon Pack's kitchens since before Alira was born, and her eyes always seemed to see more than she said out loud. Attention like that isn't always a gift, child. Sometimes it's a target painted on your back. "I didn't ask for it," Alira said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I don't even know why he stopped." Wren studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that made Alira feel like the old woman was reading a page written in a language only she understood. "No," Wren said finally. "I don't suppose you do." Before Alira could ask what she meant, a bell rang from the hall, calling the kitchen staff back to work, and the moment passed. The rest of the night blurred by in a haze of trays and orders and careful, quiet footsteps. Alira kept her head down exactly as her aunt had told her to, moving through the crowd like a shadow, refilling goblets, clearing plates, never once looking toward the raised platform where the Alpha King sat among the pack elders. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that whatever strange thing had passed between them in that moment was nothing more than a king reminding a room full of nobles that cruelty had limits, even toward someone as low-ranked as she was. It meant nothing more than that. It couldn't mean anything more than that. And yet, every time she allowed herself a single glance toward the platform, she found his gray eyes already resting somewhere near her, only to slide away the instant their gazes might meet. By the time the ball ended and the last carriage rolled away from Hollow Moon Pack's grand hall, Alira's feet ached and her back throbbed from carrying trays for 6 straight hours. She gathered her things in the small servants' room off the kitchen, exhausted, relieved it was finally over. She did not expect Seraphine to be waiting for her outside. "You think this changes anything?" Seraphine said, stepping out from the shadow of the stone archway, her blood-red gown now traded for a simpler traveling cloak. 2 of her friends stood behind her, arms crossed, faces set in matching expressions of disdain. "You think because the king felt sorry for you tonight, you're suddenly something more than what you are." Alira kept walking, clutching her bag tighter against her chest. "I never said anything like that. You didn't have to." Seraphine's voice sharpened, cutting through the cold night air. "Everyone saw the way he looked at you. It's disgusting, honestly. An Omega, catching the eye of an Alpha King, even for a moment. It's an insult to every wolf of proper rank in that hall." "I didn't ask for his attention," Alira said quietly, still walking, refusing to stop, refusing to give Seraphine the satisfaction of a confrontation. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Doesn't matter what you ask for." Seraphine's steps quickened until she was directly in Alira's path, forcing her to stop. Up close, without the crowd around them, Seraphine's beauty looked harder somehow, colder, like a statue, carved to be admired, rather than a person meant to be known. "What matters is what happens next, and I promise you, whatever foolish spark he felt tonight will be gone by morning. Kings do not choose kitchen girls, they choose queens, they choose wolves, with bloodlines worth binding to. You have neither." Alira said nothing. There was nothing to say. Seraphine wasn't telling her anything she hadn't already believed her entire life. "Stay away from him," Seraphine added, quieter now, almost venomous in its softness. "Or you'll regret it more than you can imagine." She turned and walked off into the dark with her friends trailing behind her, leaving Alira standing alone in the cold, her breath fogging in the night air, her heart still carrying the strange, unwanted weight of everything that had happened. She didn't sleep well that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw storm-gray eyes watching her across a crowded room, and every time she woke, she told herself firmly that it meant nothing, that by morning, the king would have forgotten her name entirely, exactly as Seraphine had promised. The next few days passed in ordinary rhythm. Alira returned to her usual work, helping her Aunt Maribel at the small tavern on the edge of the pack's territory, pouring drinks for tired travelers, and mending torn clothes for coin. Maribel had been thrilled to hear about the extra pay from the ball, though her smile faded slightly when Alira told her, hesitantly, about the moment with the Alpha King. He spoke to you, Maribel repeated slowly, setting down the cup she'd been drying. In front of everyone. It wasn't like that, Alira said quickly. He was just angry that they were treating me badly. That's all it was. Maribel didn't answer right away. She looked at Alira with an expression that was hard to place, something between worry and an old, careful sadness that Alira had seen flicker across her aunt's face before, usually whenever the subject of Alira's mother came up. Aunt Maribel? What is it? Nothing, Maribel said, too quickly, turning back to her work. Just be careful, that's all. Kings notice things for their own reasons. Sometimes those reasons have nothing to do with kindness. Alira wanted to press further, wanted to ask why her aunt's hands had trembled slightly around the cup, but a group of travelers walked through the tavern door just then, and the moment slipped away, buried under the demands of work. It was 4 days later, on a quiet gray afternoon, while Alira was hanging laundry behind the tavern, that she heard hooves on the road, more than she'd ever heard approaching Hollow Moon's outer village at once. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked toward the dirt path leading up from the main road. A procession was coming, dark banners marked with a silver wolf's head, the sigil of the Alpha King's personal guard, fluttered above a line of riders moving steadily toward the village. Alira's stomach dropped. By the time the riders reached the tavern, a small crowd had already gathered, drawn by curiosity and unease in equal measure. Maribel appeared at Alira's side, gripping her arm so tightly it almost hurt. The lead rider dismounted, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. He scanned the small crowd until his eyes landed on Alira, and something in his expression shifted. Satisfaction, perhaps, or relief. "Alira Vance," he said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet village square. "The Alpha King requests your presence at Hollow Moon's Central Hall." Immediately, whispers broke out around her instantly. Maribel's grip on her arm tightened further. "Requests," Alira repeated carefully, her mouth suddenly dry. "Or commands." The rider's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. With the king, those words rarely mean anything different. The ride to Hollow Moon's Central Hall felt longer than it should have, though the distance was short enough that Alira could have walked it in less than an hour on an ordinary day. She sat stiffly on the horse the guards had provided, her hands clenched around the reins, her mind racing through every possible reason the Alpha King might have summoned her. None of the reasons she imagined made sense. Kings did not summon Omega girls from small villages, unless something had gone terribly wrong, and Alira could not think of a single thing she had done wrong since the ball, unless standing quietly while being humiliated counted as a crime against the natural order that people like Seraphine believed in so fiercely. By the time they reached the tall iron gates of the Central Hall, her nerves had wound themselves into a tight knot behind her ribs. The guards led her not to the grand hall where the ball had been held, but to a smaller chamber, warmly lit, with tall windows overlooking a private garden. A fire crackled in a wide stone hearth, and the Alpha King stood near it, his back to the door, staring into the flames. "Your Majesty," the lead guard said, bowing. "The girl, as requested." Kale turned. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, and Alira found herself unable to look away, caught by the same strange gravity that had pulled at her the night of the ball. "Leave us," Kale said to the guard, who bowed again and withdrew, closing the heavy door behind him. Alira stood near the entrance, unsure whether to bow, whether to speak, whether to do anything at all. The silence stretched long enough that she began counting her own heartbeats, just to have something to focus on. "You're wondering why I sent for you," Kale said finally. "Yes, Your Majesty." He moved away from the fire, closer to her, though he kept a respectful distance, close enough to speak without effort, but far enough that she didn't feel crowded. Up close, in the quiet of this smaller room, he seemed less like the untouchable king from the stories, and more like an ordinary man carrying an extraordinary weight. "That night at the ball," he said slowly, choosing his words with visible care. "When I looked at you, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time. Something I do not fully understand myself." Alira's heart stumbled. "Your Majesty, I don't." "Let me finish," he said, not unkindly, and she fell silent. "Among wolves, there is a bond, rare and old, that some call the mate bond. It cannot be forced, cannot be faked. and it does not care about rank or bloodline or the expectations of a crowded hall. I have met hundreds of wolves in my life, Elira Vance, searching, whether I admitted it to myself or not, for a sign of that bond. I never found it, not once, until 4 nights ago. The room seemed to tilt slightly around her. You think that I am your... I don't know what I think yet, Cale said, and for the first time, she heard something almost like uncertainty in his voice, an emotion that seemed foreign, on a face built for command. That is why I sent for you. I needed to know if what I felt that night was real, or if it was simply anger at cruelty, dressed up as something else. Elira didn't know what to say. Her entire life, she had been told, in ways both spoken and unspoken, that she was the least significant person in any room she entered. And now the most powerful wolf in the kingdom was standing in front of her, admitting to uncertainty, admitting to a feeling he could not name, and somehow that admission felt heavier than any crown could ever be. Your Majesty, she said carefully, I am an Omega. Whatever you felt, it cannot be what you think it is. Kings do not bond with Omegas. Bonds do not consult rank before they form. Cale said, I did not choose this feeling. I am simply trying to understand it. He stepped closer, and Elira's wolf, restless since the night of the ball, rose up inside her chest, eager and unafraid, in a way that startled her. She had spent years teaching herself to suppress every instinct that made her feel too much, want too much, hope for too much. And yet here, in this quiet room with the fire crackling behind them, all those careful walls seemed to be crumbling without her permission. May I ask you something? Cale said. Elira nodded, unable to trust her voice. Do you feel anything unusual when I am near you? The honest answer rose in her throat before she could stop it. Yes, she whispered. I feel it too. Something shifted in his gray eyes. Relief and worry knotted together. Then we have a problem, he said quietly, because I do not think either of us is prepared for what that means. Before Elira could ask what he meant, a sharp knock came at the door, and an older woman entered without waiting for permission, dressed in fine, deep purple robes that marked her as one of the pack elders. Her sharp eyes moved from Cale to Elira and back again, calculating. Your Majesty, the woman said, her tone carrying an edge of disapproval barely hidden beneath practiced respect. Forgive the interruption. There are matters requiring your attention, matters concerning the succession. Cale's jaw tightened. This can wait, Elder Isolde. I'm afraid it cannot, Isolde said, her gaze flicking toward Elira, with obvious distaste. The council has heard rumors of your interest in this girl. They wish to remind you that an Alpha King's mate is not merely a personal matter. It is a matter of the entire kingdom's future. I am aware of the weight of my position, Cale said, his voice cooling several degrees. Then you understand, Isolde continued, why the council would need proof, undeniable proof, before entertaining the idea of an Omega standing beside the throne. Sentiment is not policy, Your Majesty. Even a king must answer to the packs he leads. Elira felt her face grow hot with humiliation, standing there while they discussed her as though she were a problem to be solved rather than a person in the room. She wanted to disappear into the floor, wanted to run back to the quiet safety of her aunt's tavern, where no one looked at her twice, let alone debated her worth in front of a king. I understand the council's concerns, Cale said finally, his eyes flicking briefly toward Elira before returning to Isolde. I will address them properly, in time. For now, this conversation is over. Isolde's mouth thinned into a hard line, but she bowed stiffly and withdrew, casting one last unreadable glance toward Elira before the door closed behind her. The warmth that had briefly filled the room seemed to have cooled with her departure. Cale let out a slow breath, running a hand through his dark hair, and for a moment, he looked less like a king and more like a man, carrying burdens too large for one set of shoulders. I'm sorry you had to hear that, he said. It's all right, Elira said quietly, though it wasn't, not really. I already know what people think of someone like me. That is precisely what I intend to prove wrong, Cale said, and something in his tone, quiet but absolutely certain, made her chest tighten with a feeling she didn't dare name yet. Your Majesty, I should return home, she said instead, retreating to safer ground. My aunt will worry. Cale studied her for a long moment before nodding. I will have you escorted back safely. But Elira, he added, as she turned toward the door. This is not the end of this conversation. Whatever this bond is, we will understand it together, whether the council approves or not. Alira left the central hall with her mind spinning, the guards escorting her home in near total silence. She barely noticed the ride back, barely noticed her aunt's worried face waiting at the tavern door, because all she could think about was the strange, terrifying warmth still humming beneath her skin, and the growing certainty that her quiet, invisible life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. News that the Alpha King had summoned an Omega girl to the central hall spread through Hollow Moon Pack faster than any fire could have. By the time Alira returned to the tavern that evening, half the village already seemed to know, whispering behind hands as she passed, some with curiosity, most with the same cold judgment she had grown used to her entire life. Maribel didn't ask many questions when Alira walked through the door, though her eyes searched her niece's face carefully, looking for signs of harm. "You're all right?" she asked, taking Alira's cold hands in her own. "I'm all right," Alira said, though her voice shook slightly. "He wanted to talk, that's all." Maribel's expression tightened, but she said nothing more that night, simply pulling Alira into a tight hug and pressing a warm cup of tea into her hands before sending her to bed. Sleep did not come easily. Alira lay awake for hours, staring at the low wooden ceiling of her small room, replaying every word Cale had spoken. A bond. He had used the word bond, the sacred connection wolves spoke of in old stories, the kind meant to happen only once in a lifetime, if it happened at all. She had never expected such a thing to exist for her. Omegas were not supposed to have fated mates who ruled kingdoms. Omegas were supposed to marry quietly, if they married at all, to other Omegas, or low-ranked betas willing to overlook their status. And yet, she pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat, steady and strong, and beneath it, something else. A warmth that had not been there before the ball. A quiet hum that seemed to stretch toward something far away, toward him. 3 days passed, with no further word from the central hall. Alira told herself she was relieved, that perhaps the council's warnings had convinced Cale to abandon whatever strange feeling had briefly caught hold of him. She returned to her ordinary routine, pouring drinks, mending clothes, helping her aunt manage the tavern's accounts, and slowly, the whispers around the village began to quiet, replaced by newer gossip about a trade dispute between two neighboring packs. She almost believed the moment had passed. Then, on the 4th evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, a single rider approached the tavern, moving at a much gentler pace than the guards who had come before. Alira recognized him immediately, not by his face, but by the quiet, deliberate way he moved. Cale had come alone, dressed simply, without the ceremonial cloak or crown that marked him as king, looking almost like any traveler passing through. "Your Majesty," Alira breathed, stepping out from behind the tavern counter as he entered. "Please," he said quietly, glancing around at the handful of patrons who had gone utterly silent at his arrival. "Just Cale, if you don't mind. I would rather not draw more attention than necessary." Maribel appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes wide with surprise, before quickly smoothing into practiced hospitality. "Your Majesty, we're honored. Please, sit, I'll bring." "Thank you, but I only wish to speak with Alira, if she is willing," Cale said gently. "Somewhere quiet, if such a place exists here." Maribel glanced at Alira, who nodded, and led them both toward the small garden behind the tavern, currently empty in the cool evening air. Once they were alone, seated on a worn wooden bench beneath a leaning apple tree, Cale seemed to relax slightly, the weight of his crown lifted, if only for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For the way Elder Isolde spoke of you, that was unacceptable, and I should have addressed it more firmly." "You don't owe me anything," Alira said quietly. "I'm used to people speaking of me that way." "That is exactly the problem," Cale said, his gray eyes sharpening. "You should not have to be used to it. No one should." Alira looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond to kindness so plainly offered, without expectation or condition attached. "Why did you come here tonight?" Cale was quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade behind the hills. "Because I have spent 3 days trying to convince myself that what I felt at the ball was a mistake, a trick of exhaustion or anger. I could not manage it. Every attempt only made the feeling stronger." "The council will never accept this," Alira said. "An Omega, chosen as queen, It's never happened before. Many things have never happened before. Until they do, Kale said. I did not become king by following only what had already been done. It's not the same, Alira insisted, though her voice trembled slightly. You have a kingdom to think of. Alliances, bloodlines, the future of every pack under your protection. I have nothing to offer any of that. I don't even know who my father was. My aunt has never spoken his name, not once in 18 years. Something flickered across Kale's face at that, quick and thoughtful, gone before she could name it. Your mother, he said carefully. What do you know of her? Alira blinked, surprised by the sudden shift. Very little. She died when I was 6. My aunt raised me since. She rarely speaks of her, only that she was kind, and that she loved me very much. Does your aunt have anything that belonged to her? Letters, jewelry, anything at all? Why does it matter? Alira asked, confused by the intensity in his question. Kale hesitated, as though weighing how much to say. There is something about you, Alira, beyond the bond I feel. Something familiar, though I cannot place where I have felt it before. It may be nothing, but I would like to understand it, if you're willing to help me try. Before Alira could answer, a rustle came from the tavern doorway, and Maribel appeared, her face unusually pale in the fading light. Your Majesty, she said carefully, forgive my interruption, but I couldn't help overhearing. There is something I think you both should know. Alira turned to her aunt, startled by the tension in her voice. Aunt Maribel, what is it? Maribel's hands twisted together in front of her, an old nervous habit Alira recognized from childhood, one that only appeared when something serious weighed on her mind. I made a promise, many years ago, to your mother, never to speak certain things aloud, unless it became truly necessary. She glanced toward Kale, then back to Alira, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I believe that time has come. Alira's heart pounded. Aunt Maribel, what are you talking about? Maribel took a slow breath, steadying herself. Your mother did not come from a low-ranked family, Alira. She was born into a bloodline far greater than anyone in this village has ever known. She fled that life, and hid herself among Omegas, to protect you from something she never fully explained to me. All these years, I believed the danger had passed. I see now that I was wrong. The garden fell utterly silent, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves overhead. Alira stared at her aunt, feeling the ground shift beneath everything she thought she understood about her own life. What bloodline? She whispered. Maribel's eyes met Kale's briefly, before returning to Alira, heavy with years of carried secrets. I think, she said quietly, it would be better if you heard the rest from someone who remembers her better than I do. There is someone, an old friend of your mother's, still living at the edge of the northern woods. If the king is willing to escort you safely, I believe it is time you finally learned the truth. The journey to the northern woods took the better part of 2 days, riding along quiet forest paths that grew wilder and less traveled the further they went from Hollow Moonpack's central lands. Kale had insisted on escorting Alira himself, along with 2 trusted guards who rode a respectful distance behind, close enough to protect, far enough to allow conversation. Alira had never traveled beyond the borders of her own pack's territory before. Everything felt strange and vivid, the smell of pine and damp earth, the calls of unfamiliar birds overhead, the way the light filtered green and gold through thick canopies of ancient trees. It might have felt like an adventure, if her chest weren't so tight with dread about what she might learn at the end of it. You've been quiet, Kale observed, guiding his horse alongside hers as the path narrowed. I keep trying to imagine what my aunt meant, Alira admitted. A bloodline greater than anyone in the village has known. What could that possibly mean for someone like me? I don't know, Kale said honestly. But whatever the truth is, it will not change what I already know about you. Alira glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. You barely know me at all. I know that you endured cruelty at that ball, with more grace than most alphas I've trained beside for years, Kale said. I know that you would rather blame yourself for spilled wine than accept an apology you were owed. I know that despite everything you've been told about your worth, some part of you still looked up at the stars painted on that ceiling, instead of keeping your eyes on the floor like you were taught to. That tells me quite a lot, Alira, regardless of any bloodline. Alira felt heat rise in her cheeks, unused to being seen so clearly by anyone, let alone a king. She didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing, and they rode on in a silence that felt, for the first time, comfortable rather than heavy. By the second evening, they reached the edge of the northern woods, where a small cottage stood nestled among tall birch trees, smoke curling gently from its chimney. An old woman sat outside on a weathered porch, her silver hair pulled back in a simple braid, her eyes sharp despite the deep lines etched into her face by time. She rose slowly as they approached, leaning on a carved wooden staff, and her gaze fixed on Alira with an intensity that made the younger woman's breath catch. "Celine's eyes," the old woman whispered, so quietly, Alira almost missed it. "After all these years." "You knew my mother," Alira said, dismounting carefully, her legs unsteady from the long ride. "I did," the woman said. "My name is Odessa. I served your mother's household before everything fell apart. Come inside, child. This is not a story meant to be told standing in the open." The cottage was small but warm, filled with the scent of dried herbs and old parchment. Odessa gestured for them to sit near the hearth, while she prepared tea with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from age or emotion, Alira couldn't tell. "Your mother's name was Celine Ashgrove," Odessa began once they were settled, the firelight casting long shadows across her weathered face. "She was born into the Ashgrove line, one of the oldest and most powerful bloodlines among wolfkind, rulers of the Silver Vale territory, long before Hollow Moonpack ever existed as it does now." Alira's hands tightened around her untouched cup. "Rulers. My mother was royalty." "She was heir to Silver Vale," Odessa confirmed, "destined to lead her people, until everything changed the night her own uncle betrayed her family, seizing control through violence, disguised as a hunting accident. Celine was only 19, she barely escaped with her life, fleeing with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child growing inside her, you, though she did not know it yet." "Why did she never tell me?" Alira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fear," Odessa said simply. "Her uncle believed she had died in the same accident that claimed her parents. If he ever learned she survived, and that she had left behind an heir with a rightful claim to Silver Vale, your life would have been in constant danger. She chose to disappear entirely, to raise you somewhere small and forgotten, believing obscurity was the only true protection she could offer you." Cale had gone very still beside Alira, his gray eyes fixed on Odessa with an intensity that suggested pieces were falling into place in his mind. "Silver Vale," he said slowly. "That territory has been ruled by a regent for nearly 2 decades now, hasn't it? Claiming to hold the throne until a rightful heir could be found. A regent who has never once genuinely searched for that heir," Odessa said, her voice hardening. "Because he already knew where to look and preferred the throne remain unclaimed, under his own control." "Her uncle," Alira said, understanding dawning slowly, cold and heavy in her stomach. "He's still alive." "He is," Odessa confirmed. "And if word reaches him that Celine's daughter survived, and that she has caught the attention of the Alpha King himself, I fear the danger your mother spent her life trying to protect you from may finally have found you." The cottage fell silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Alira stared down at her hands, trying to absorb everything. The mother she barely remembered, transformed suddenly, into a fugitive princess. Herself, transformed from a forgotten Omega, into the last living heir of a stolen throne. "This is why the bond feels different," Cale said quietly, almost to himself. "Why something about you felt familiar from the very first moment. Silver Vale bloodlines carry a particular strength, recognized even across generations. My own great-grandmother came from a lesser branch of that same line." "You're related to my mother's family," Alira said, stunned. "Distantly," Cale said. "Distant enough that it changes nothing between us, but close enough perhaps that some part of me recognized your blood before I understood what I was recognizing." Odessa watched them both with careful, knowing eyes. "The council that governs beside the Alpha King will not easily accept an unknown heir claiming royal blood without proof," she warned, "and Silver Vale's regent will not surrender his stolen throne without a fight, especially not to a girl he likely believes has been dead for 18 years. "Then we will need proof," Cale said, his voice firming with resolve. "And we will need it before word of tonight's conversation reaches ears that mean Alira harm." Odessa rose slowly, moving toward a locked wooden chest, tucked in the corner of the cottage. She opened it with careful, reverent hands, withdrawing a small velvet pouch that she pressed into Alira's palms. Your mother left this with me the night she fled Silver Vale, Odessa said. I have kept it safe for 18 years, waiting for a day I feared might never come. Open it, child. It belongs to you now. With trembling fingers, Alira loosened the drawstring and tipped the pouch's contents into her palm. A ring fell out, simple silver, engraved with a crest she had never seen before, a wolf standing beneath a crescent moon, its eyes set with two small, glittering sapphires. The Ashgrove seal, Odessa said softly. Proof of your bloodline, recognized by any wolf who has studied Silver Vale's history. Guard it carefully, Alira. It may be the only thing standing between you and a throne that rightfully belongs to you. The ring felt heavier than its size should have allowed, resting in Alira's palm like a small, cold weight, tethering her to a past she had never known existed. She turned it slowly, watching firelight catch against the sapphire eyes of the engraved wolf, trying to imagine her mother wearing this same ring, running through unfamiliar forests with nothing but fear, and a hidden child to guide her. We should leave before first light, Cale said, his voice low but firm, as he glanced toward the cottage's small window, where darkness had fully settled outside. If Silver Vale's regent has spies anywhere near these woods, the longer we remain, the greater the risk. Odessa nodded in agreement, already moving to gather a small bundle of supplies from a shelf near the hearth. There is a hidden path leading east from here, away from the main road. It will take longer, but it avoids the villages where word travels fastest. Alira closed her fingers around the ring, tucking it carefully into the small pouch Odessa had given her, and slipped it beneath her cloak, close against her heart. Odessa, will you be safe here, after we leave, if anyone learns you helped us? The old woman's weathered face softened into something like fondness. I have kept this secret for 18 years, child. I know how to protect myself. Worry about your own path now, not mine. They left before dawn, moving quietly through the hidden forest trail Odessa had described, the two guards flanking them at a careful distance. The journey back toward Hollow Moon Pack felt different from the ride out, heavier somehow, weighted by everything Alira now carried, not just the ring hidden beneath her cloak, but the knowledge of who she truly was, and the danger that knowledge now placed her in. You've been quiet again, Cale said, as they paused to water the horses beside a narrow stream, the morning mist still clinging low to the ground. I don't know how to feel, Alira admitted. Yesterday, I was an Omega girl serving drinks in a village tavern. Today I'm supposed to believe I'm the last heir to a stolen throne, hunted by a man who thinks I've been dead for 18 years. You don't have to feel anything specific right away, Cale said gently. Give yourself time. Time feels like a luxury I may not have, Alira said, glancing at him. If Silver Vale's regent learns I'm alive, what happens then? Cale's jaw tightened. Then we prepare. I will not let harm come to you, Alira, whatever it takes. You barely know me, she said again, though this time the words came out softer, less like a defense, and more like genuine confusion, at how easily he seemed to have decided this. I know enough, Cale said simply, and I intend to know more, if you'll allow it. They resumed their journey, and by midday, Alira noticed a change in the forest around them, the trees thinning gradually, sunlight breaking more freely through gaps in the canopy. They were nearing the edge of Hollow Moon's territory again, close enough that the guards visibly relaxed their vigilance. That relaxation proved premature. The attack came without warning, 3 riders bursting from a hidden ravine to their left, blades already drawn, moving with the coordinated precision of wolves who had planned this ambush carefully. Cale reacted instantly, shifting between Alira and the attackers with a speed that startled her, his body already beginning to change, dark fur rippling across his skin as his wolf answered the threat. Get behind me, he snarled, though his voice had already deepened into something less human, more primal. Alira's own wolf surged forward without her conscious command, instinct overriding 18 years of careful suppression. She felt her bones shift, felt the world tilt as her vision sharpened, colors deepening, sounds growing crisper, and within moments, she stood on 4 paws instead of 2, her wolf form pale silver, unlike anything she had ever seen among Hollow Moon's wolves. One of the guards fell quickly, caught off guard by the ambush's timing, though he managed to drag himself toward the tree line, wounded but alive. Cale moved like a storm given shape, meeting the largest attacker head-on, teeth and claws flashing in brutal, efficient motion, that spoke of years of battle experience. Elira found herself facing the remaining rider, a wiry man, with cold eyes who circled her cautiously, clearly recognizing that her silver coat marked her as something unusual, something worth capturing, rather than simply eliminating. Silvervale's little lost princess, the man said, his voice carrying easily even in wolf form, a strange ability some older wolves retained. The regent will pay handsomely for you, alive preferably, though I suspect he'd settle for less. Elira's wolf snarled, every instinct screaming to run, but beneath the fear, something else stirred, an anger that had been buried for 18 years, beneath careful obedience and quiet submission. She was tired, she realized suddenly, tired of being small, tired of being something other people decided the value of. When the man lunged, she moved without thinking, twisting aside with a speed she didn't know she possessed, and countered with a strike that caught him across the shoulder, drawing blood and a surprised yelp of pain. He stumbled back, reassessing, clearly not expecting an untrained Omega to fight back at all, let alone effectively. Nearby, Kale finished dealing with the larger attacker, who now lay unmoving on the forest floor, and turned just in time to see the wiry man make a second attempt at Elira, this time with a dagger drawn from his belt, silver-bladed, and clearly meant to do lasting harm even to a wolf. Kale crossed the distance in a blur, intercepting the blade meant for Elira with his own body, the silver edge catching him across the forearm, as he wrestled the weapon away and pinned the attacker to the ground with terrifying controlled force. "Who sent you?" Kale demanded, his voice a low growl, human enough now to form clear words, despite still standing, partially shifted. The man laughed, a broken, defiant sound. "You already know who sent us, Your Majesty. Silvervale's regent does not forgive loose threads left unresolved for 18 years. Take him," Kale ordered the surviving guard, who limped forward to bind the attacker's hands with rope pulled from his saddlebag. "He'll answer for this properly, before the council if necessary." Once the immediate danger passed, Kale turned toward Elira, his gray eyes searching her over with obvious concern, though his own arm bled freely from the silver blade's cut. "Are you hurt?" Elira shifted back to human form, her chest heaving from adrenaline and fear both, and shook her head. "I'm fine. You're bleeding." "It will heal," Kale said, though he winced slightly as he flexed his injured arm. "Silver wounds take longer, but they heal all the same." Elira stared at him, at the blood soaking through his sleeve, blood he had shed protecting her without a moment's hesitation, and something inside her chest cracked open, some final wall she had spent years building against hope, against trust, against the terrifying possibility that someone might actually choose to stand between her and danger without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't need to thank me for that," Kale said, meeting her eyes steadily. "I would do it again, without question." They stood there a moment longer, the forest quiet around them except for the labored breathing of the bound attacker and the distant call of birds returning now that the danger had passed. Elira understood, with sudden and absolute clarity, that whatever strange bond connected them, it was no longer something she could simply dismiss or wish away. Whatever came next, whatever danger Silvervale's regent still posed, she would not face it as the same quiet, invisible girl who had walked into that ballroom 4 nights ago. That girl, she realized, was already gone. They reached Hollow Moon Pack's central hall by nightfall, exhausted and shaken. The bound attacker delivered immediately to the pack's dungeons for questioning. Word of the ambush had somehow already begun spreading by the time they arrived, whispered urgently among guards and servants alike, though the full truth of Elira's identity remained, for now, carefully guarded. Kale insisted on having his own healer examine the silver wound on his arm, waving off Elira's concern, with a reassurance that it looked worse than it truly was. Still, she noticed the tightness around his eyes as the healer worked, the careful way he held himself, and she felt a fresh wave of guilt settle over her, knowing the wound existed because of the danger now following her. "This isn't your fault," Kale said, as though reading the thoughts crossing her face, while the healer wrapped clean bandages around his forearm. "Silvervale's regent has been a threat, waiting to surface for 18 years. You didn't create that danger. You simply survived it. If I hadn't come with you today, you wouldn't be injured," Elira said quietly. "If you hadn't come with me today, You might already be in the regent's hands, Kale countered. I would rather bear a wound than imagine that outcome. Elira didn't have a response for that, so she said nothing, watching as the healer finished her work and quietly excused herself, leaving them alone in the small private chamber once more. We need to bring this before the council, Kale said finally, flexing his bandaged arm carefully. Both the truth of your bloodline and the attack itself. The longer we wait, the more room we give Silvervale's regent to prepare a stronger response. The council already dislikes the idea of an Omega near your throne, Elira said. How will they react to all of this, on top of everything else? Elder Isolde will resist, certainly, Kale admitted. But not every member of the council shares her views, and proof of royal bloodline changes the nature of the conversation entirely, whether they like it or not. The council convened the following morning in Hollow Moon's formal chamber, a wide circular room lined with tall windows and seats reserved for pack elders and representatives from allied territories. Elira stood at Kale's side, the Ashgrove ring now worn openly on a chain around her neck, her heart pounding, as a dozen powerful wolves studied her, with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Elder Isolde sat near the front, her purple robes immaculate as always, her sharp eyes narrowing the moment Elira entered. Your Majesty, the Isolde said, rising slightly from her seat. I understood this council session concerned matters of border security. I did not expect to find the Omega girl present once again. This session concerns exactly that, Elder Isolde, Kale said calmly. Border security, and a threat that has already resulted in an attack against myself and my guards. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Kale proceeded to recount the ambush in careful detail, watching the shifting expressions of the assembled council as understanding slowly dawned. When he finished, he gestured toward Elira, who stepped forward despite the tightness in her chest, holding the silver ring, where the entire chamber could see it clearly. This belonged to Selene Ashgrove, Kale continued, heir to Silvervale's throne, believed dead for 18 years following her uncle's betrayal. Elira Vance is her daughter, and the rightful heir to Silvervale, hidden in secrecy her entire life to protect her from exactly the kind of attack we survived yesterday. The chamber erupted into overlapping voices, some skeptical, some startled. A few, Elira noticed, watching her with something closer to genuine curiosity than judgment. Isolde's face had gone pale, though whether from shock or calculation, Elira couldn't tell. This is a serious claim, Isolde said sharply, once the chamber quieted enough for her voice to carry. Silvervale's regent has ruled that territory for nearly 2 decades. Are we truly meant to believe a kitchen girl from Hollow Moon's outer villages is secretly royalty, based on nothing more than a ring and a convenient story? The ring bears the Ashgrove seal, verifiable by any scholar familiar with Silvervale's history, Kale said evenly. Additionally, Odessa, former servant of the Ashgrove household, remains prepared to testify to everything I have described, should the council require further confirmation. An older wolf near the back of the chamber, silent until now, leaned forward with visible interest. I remember Selene Ashgrove, he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of age. I met her once, many years ago, before the tragedy that claimed her family. If this girl truly carries her blood, there may be a way to confirm it, beyond mere testimony. What way? Kale asked. The old bonding rites, the elder said. Silvervale bloodlines carry a distinct resonance, recognizable through ritual, older than most current pact traditions. It would require the girl's willingness, and perhaps some risk, but it would settle the matter beyond any reasonable doubt. Elira's throat tightened. What kind of risk? The elder studied her carefully. The rite draws upon deep instinct, testing bloodline through the wolf's most primal nature. It is not without danger, child, but it has never failed to reveal the truth, one way or another. Elira glanced at Kale, searching his expression for guidance, and found only quiet support, the choice clearly left entirely to her. I'll do it, she said, before fear could talk her out of it. If it proves the truth, I'll do it. Isolde's mouth pressed into a thin, displeased line, but even she seemed to recognize the fairness of the proposal, unable to argue against a test that would either confirm or dismantle Elira's claim entirely. Then it is settled, the older elder said. The rite will take place 3 days from now, under the full council's witness. Let the truth reveal itself, whatever that truth may be. As the council session ended and wolves began filing out of the chamber, murmuring among themselves, Kale leaned close to Alira, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Are you certain about this?" he asked. "The old rites are not gentle." "I've spent my whole life being told I'm nothing," Alira said quietly, watching the last of the council members disappear through the tall doors. "If there's a way to finally know the truth, one way or another, I need to take it. I can't keep living caught between two lives, not knowing which one is truly mine." Kale studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind his gray eyes. "Then we will face it together," he said, "whatever the rite reveals." The 3 days leading up to the bonding rite passed in a strange blur for Alira, caught between preparation and dread. Odessa arrived at Hollow Moon Pack the day after the council session, summoned formally to testify, and to help guide Alira through whatever the ancient ritual would require of her. "The rite draws on the deepest instincts of your wolf," Odessa explained, sitting across from Alira in the quiet guest chamber Kale had arranged for her within the central hall. "It will strip away everything but truth, bloodline recognized through primal memory, passed down through generations. If you are truly Celine's daughter, your wolf will know it, even if your mind does not fully understand what is happening." "And if I'm not," Alira said quietly, voicing the fear she'd carried since agreeing to the ritual, "what happens then?" Odessa's expression softened with something like sympathy. "Then the rite simply ends, without harm, though the truth of your identity would remain uncertain. But child, I have known you only a short while, and already I see your mother in the way you carry yourself, in your eyes, in your quiet strength. I do not believe the rite will reveal anything other than what we already know." Despite Odessa's reassurance, sleep continued to elude Alira in the nights leading up to the ceremony. She found herself wandering the central hall's quiet gardens late one evening, unable to settle her racing thoughts, when she found Kale sitting alone, near a small fountain, seemingly lost in his own contemplation. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, settling onto the stone bench beside him. "Rarely do, the nights before something important," Kale admitted, "though I imagine my worries pale beside yours." "I keep thinking about what happens after," Alira admitted. "If the rite proves I'm truly Celine's daughter, if I really am Silver Veil's heir, what does that mean for us, for whatever this bond is between us?" Kale turned to look at her fully, the moonlight softening the usual sharp authority of his features into something gentler, more uncertain. "It means you would have a claim to your own throne, your own kingdom to lead, should you choose to reclaim it. It would not change what I feel for you, Alira. But I understand, if such a future complicates things you hadn't considered." "And if I choose not to reclaim it?" Alira asked. "If I simply want an ordinary life, whatever that might look like now?" "Then that choice would be entirely yours to make," Kale said firmly. "I did not seek you out because of a throne you might inherit. I sought you out because something in me recognized something in you, long before either of us understood why." Alira felt warmth spread through her chest, despite the cool night air, a warmth that had grown steadily familiar over these past strange, transformative days. "Seraphine warned me, the night of the ball, that whatever you felt would fade by morning, that kings do not choose kitchen girls. Seraphine understands very little about genuine bonds," Kale said, something hard entering his voice, "and even less about genuine worth. What I feel for you has only grown stronger with each passing day, Alira, not faded." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching moonlight ripple across the fountain's still water, until exhaustion finally pulled them both toward much-needed rest. The day of the rite arrived crisp and clear. The entire council gathered once more in the formal chamber, along with several additional witnesses drawn from allied packs, curious about the unusual proceedings. Odessa stood near the front, alongside the elder who had proposed the ritual, a woman named Elder Tamsin, whose weathered hands now held a small ornate bowl filled with dark, fragrant oil. "The rite requires a small offering of blood, mixed with oils, blessed through old rituals passed down since Silver Veil's founding," Tamsin explained to the assembled chamber. "If the girl's blood carries true Ashgrove lineage, the mixture will glow with the pale silver light unique to that bloodline. If not, the oil will remain unchanged." Alira stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly despite her efforts to appear composed. Kale stood close beside her, his presence a steady anchor against the weight of dozens of watching eyes. "Are you ready, child?" Tamsin asked gently, Elira nodded, extending her hand as instructed. Tamsin made a small, careful cut across her palm, with a ceremonial blade, collecting several drops of blood into the waiting bowl of oil. The chamber fell utterly silent, every wolf present holding their breath as Tamsin gently swirled the mixture, waiting. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Elira's heart sank, fear creeping in, that perhaps Odessa had been wrong, perhaps the ring meant nothing, perhaps she truly was simply an ordinary Omega after all. Then, slowly, the oil began to shimmer, a pale silver light spreading outward from where her blood had mixed, growing brighter, until it illuminated the entire bowl with an unmistakable, ethereal glow that reflected off the chamber's tall windows. Gasps rippled through the assembled council. Even Elder Isolde's carefully composed expression cracked, replaced by genuine shock as she stared at the glowing proof before her. "The Ashgrove light," Tamsin announced, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Unmistakable. Undeniable. This girl carries true royal blood of Silver Vale's founding line." Kale's hand found Elira's uninjured one, squeezing gently, pride and relief evident in his gray eyes as he looked at her. "It's done," he said quietly. "The truth is proven, beyond any doubt now." Elira stared at the glowing bowl, feeling something settle inside her chest that she hadn't realized had been unsettled for her entire life. A quiet, steady certainty, replacing years of doubt about her own worth. She was not simply an Omega who had been humiliated at a ball. She was Celine Ashgrove's daughter, heir to a throne stolen through betrayal, and standing here now, proven beyond question, in front of the very council that had once dismissed her as nothing. "This changes everything," Isolde said slowly, though her tone had shifted from hostility toward something more cautious, more calculating. "Silver Vale's regent will not simply relinquish his throne upon hearing this news, proof or not." "No," Kale agreed, his expression hardening with fresh resolve. "He will not. Which means we must prepare accordingly, and quickly, before he decides that silencing the truth is easier than surrendering to it." News of the bonding rites outcome spread through Hollow Moon Pack within hours, and from there, outward to every allied territory within days. What had once been quiet gossip about an Omega catching the Alpha King's eye transformed rapidly into something far larger. Whispered discussions about a lost heir returning to reclaim a stolen throne, about a betrayal, 18 years buried, finally coming to light. Elira found herself suddenly surrounded by a formality she had never experienced. Guards assigned to her protection at all hours, advisors requesting audiences to discuss Silver Vale's history and politics, servants addressing her with titles that still felt foreign on her ears. It was overwhelming, disorienting, and yet beneath the chaos, she felt something steady growing within her, a quiet confidence she had never been permitted to feel before. Seraphine, predictably, did not take the news well. Elira encountered her 3 days after the rite, in a quiet hallway near the central hall's eastern wing, where Seraphine stood waiting with an expression carefully arranged into something resembling humility, though her eyes betrayed simmering resentment beneath. "Lady Elira," Seraphine said, the title clearly costing her considerable effort to produce, "I wish to offer my congratulations on your revealed heritage." "Thank you," Elira said carefully, uncertain what game Seraphine might be playing. "I also wish to apologize," Seraphine continued, "for my behavior at the mating ball. I did not know, of course, who you truly were. Had I known, I would never have humiliated me," Elira finished, her voice quiet but firm. "Seraphine, the fact that I carry royal blood does not make what you did acceptable. It was wrong regardless of my bloodline. It would have been wrong, even if I truly were nothing more than a kitchen girl." Seraphine's carefully arranged humility faltered, something more genuine flickering across her features, perhaps embarrassment, perhaps the first real shame she had felt in years. "You're right," she said finally, quietly. "I judged you based on rank alone, and that was cruel of me, regardless of what I've since learned about your birth." Elira studied her for a long moment, surprised by the apparent sincerity. "I appreciate you saying that," she said finally. "But trust isn't rebuilt with a single conversation, Seraphine. If you truly mean what you've said, show it through how you treat others going forward, not just me." Seraphine nodded, something thoughtful settling over her expression as she withdrew, leaving Illyra alone in the quiet hallway, feeling lighter somehow, having finally spoken a truth she'd swallowed for years. That evening, Cale requested her presence in the same small chamber where he had first explained the bond between them, weeks that felt like a lifetime ago now. He looked tired when she arrived, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights spent in strategy meetings with his advisors. "We've received word from Silver Vale," he said without preamble, once she'd settled into the seat across from him. "The Regent has heard of your survival, and of the bonding rites outcome." Illyra's stomach tightened. What does he intend to do? "He claims he wishes to meet with you, to discuss the matter peacefully," Cale said, though skepticism colored his tone heavily. "My advisors believe it's a trap, an attempt to eliminate the threat you pose to his stolen throne, under the guise of diplomacy." "Do you believe that too?" Illyra asked. "I believe caution is warranted," Cale said carefully. "But I also believe Silver Vale's people deserve better than a regent who rules through fear and betrayal. If there's any genuine chance to resolve this without further bloodshed, I think we owe it to them to consider it, carefully, and with proper protection in place." Illyra considered this for a long moment, memories of Odessa's warnings, of her mother's terror-driven flight so many years ago, weighing heavily against the quiet, steady courage that had grown within her since the rite's confirmation. "I want to meet him," she said finally, "not alone, and not without protection, but I want to look this man in the eyes, the one who destroyed my mother's family, and let him see that his crimes did not erase her legacy, that I am still here, despite everything he tried to prevent." Cale studied her, something like fierce pride shining behind his gray eyes. "Then we will arrange it carefully, with every precaution my advisors can devise. I will not risk your safety, Illyra, not even for the sake of peace." The meeting was arranged to take place a week later, at neutral ground along Silver Vale's border, with strict conditions requiring equal numbers of guards on both sides, and Elder Tamsin present to oversee any use of old rites or magic that might otherwise go undetected. Illyra spent the intervening days preparing carefully, studying Silver Vale's history and politics with Odessa's patient guidance, practicing the quiet, steady composure she would need to face the man responsible for her family's destruction. On the morning of the meeting, as guards prepared horses and supplies for the journey, Illyra found herself standing once more, in the quiet garden behind the central hall, the same place where Cale had first admitted the uncertainty of his feelings weeks ago. She touched the Ashgrove ring, now worn openly on her finger rather than hidden beneath her cloak, feeling its cool weight ground her against the nervous energy building in her chest. "Whatever happens today," Cale said, joining her beside the quiet fountain, "know that you do not face it alone. Whatever throne you choose to claim or leave behind, whatever path you decide for your future, I intend to stand beside you through all of it." Illyra turned to him, searching his familiar gray eyes for any trace of doubt, finding none. "Even if I choose to reclaim Silver Vale's throne? Even knowing that might mean ruling two kingdoms apart, rather than one together?" "Distance has never frightened wolves bound by true connection," Cale said simply. "We would find our way, Illyra, whatever shape our future takes. I have no doubt of that." Illyra allowed herself, for the first time since this entire journey began, to imagine a future beyond mere survival, beyond simply enduring whatever cruelty or danger came her way. She imagined a future built on genuine choice, genuine partnership, genuine strength claimed, rather than granted by others' permission. "Then let's go meet him," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear still coiled beneath her calm. "Let's finally end what he started 18 years ago." The neutral meeting ground sat at the edge of a wide, open valley, marking the border between Hollow Moon's territory and Silver Vale, a place chosen specifically because no forest cover existed nearby to hide potential ambush. Illyra rode alongside Cale, flanked by a dozen carefully chosen guards, while across the valley, an equal number of Silver Vale soldiers escorted a tall, silver-haired man whose bearing radiated the same cold authority she remembered from Odessa's careful descriptions. Regent Corwin Ashgrove looked exactly as Odessa had described, sharp-featured and precise in every movement, his eyes a pale, calculating blue that studied Illyra with unsettling intensity as their two parties finally met in the valley's center. "So," Corwin said, his voice smooth and cultured, betraying none of the violence Odessa claimed he was capable of, "Celine's daughter, alive after all these years. I confess, I did not expect this particular surprise. I imagine you didn't, Elira said, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage, drawing on every ounce of composure she'd practiced over the past week. You believed my mother died that night, along with any threat she posed to your stolen throne. Something flickered behind Corwin's pale eyes, quickly hidden. Stolen is a harsh word, child. I merely stepped forward to lead our people during a time of tragedy, when circumstances left the throne unexpectedly vacant. Circumstances you created, Kale said sharply, stepping slightly forward. Let us not pretend otherwise, Regent Corwin. We are all aware of what truly happened that night. Corwin's composed expression tightened fractionally. Careful, Your Majesty. Accusations without proof serve no one well, especially between territories that might otherwise find peaceful resolution to this unfortunate situation. I have proof enough, Elira said, drawing herself up straighter, feeling the weight of the Ashgrove ring on her finger like an anchor. The bonding rite confirmed my bloodline before an entire council of witnesses. Every wolf in Silver Vale and beyond now knows Celine's daughter survived, and that her claim to the throne remains valid. A claim, Corwin said carefully, that would require considerable disruption to enforce, disruption that would harm countless innocent wolves, currently living peacefully under my governance. Are you truly prepared for that kind of conflict, child? You've held this identity for mere weeks. I have ruled Silver Vale for 18 years. Elira felt a flicker of doubt at his words, exactly the kind of doubt she suspected he intended to plant, but she pushed through it, remembering Odessa's careful counsel about the manipulation Corwin was known for. I am not interested in conflict for its own sake, Regent Corwin, but I will not simply walk away from what is rightfully mine, nor abandon whatever justice my mother deserves after everything you took from her. Corwin studied her for a long, calculating moment, clearly recalculating whatever strategy he had arrived with. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is room for compromise. I could offer you a position within Silver Vale's governance, a title, comfortable living, in exchange for formally renouncing any claim to the throne itself. It would spare everyone considerable difficulty. You mean it would spare you the difficulty of surrendering what you stole, Elira said, her voice hardening. I did not travel here to negotiate away my mother's legacy for comfortable living, Regent Corwin. I came here to tell you, directly, that your time ruling Silver Vale through fear and false claims is coming to an end. Corwin's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, something colder and more dangerous surfacing beneath his cultured exterior. You are young and naive, child, if you believe reclaiming a throne is as simple as declaring your bloodline before a council. Silver Vale's soldiers answer to me. Its resources, its alliances, all remain firmly under my control. Whatever claim you carry means nothing without the strength to enforce it. Then perhaps it's time Silver Vale's people learned the truth about who truly holds legitimate claim to their throne, Kale said, his voice carrying clearly across the valley, loud enough that soldiers on both sides could hear, and decided for themselves which leader deserves their loyalty, the man who murdered his own family to seize power, or the rightful heir he failed to eliminate. Murmurs rippled through Corwin's assembled soldiers, uncertainty visible on several faces. Corwin's eyes narrowed dangerously, clearly recognizing the shift in atmosphere Kale's words had created. You would incite rebellion within my own ranks, Corwin said sharply. I would simply speak truth where it has been buried too long, Kale replied evenly. What your soldiers choose to do with that truth is entirely their own decision. Elira watched the exchange, understanding suddenly what Kale was doing, giving Corwin's own soldiers the chance to question loyalty built on a foundation of lies. She stepped forward herself, addressing not Corwin directly, but the assembled soldiers behind him. I am not here to punish those who have simply followed orders these past 18 years, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I understand that most of you believed Regent Corwin's claim to legitimate rule, just as I once believed I was nothing more than a forgotten Omega. But I am Celine Ashgrove's daughter, proven before witnesses through the old rites, and I am telling you now, directly, that the man standing before you murdered his own family to seize the throne he currently holds. A tense silence stretched across the valley, broken only by the soft sound of wind moving through open grass. Then, slowly, one of Corwin's soldiers, an older wolf with weathered features, stepped forward and knelt, placing his fist against his chest, in an ancient gesture of fealty. I served your grandfather, the older soldier said, his voice carrying clearly. I always suspected something was wrong the night your family died, though I lacked proof to act on my suspicions. If you truly are Celine's daughter, return to reclaim what is rightfully yours, then I offer my loyalty, freely and completely. One by one, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, more soldiers began to follow, kneeling before Elira despite Corwin's furious protests. Within minutes, the regent stood nearly alone, his carefully built authority crumbling before her eyes, the truth finally breaking through 18 years of carefully maintained lies. This is not over, Corwin snarled, backing away toward his few remaining loyal guards. You may have won today's audience, but reclaiming an entire throne requires far more than a moment's dramatic speech. Perhaps, Elira said calmly, watching him retreat. But today, Regent Corwin, you have lost something far more valuable than a single confrontation. You have lost the loyalty your stolen throne always depended on. Corwin fled the valley shortly after, along with a handful of soldiers who remained loyal despite everything revealed that day, disappearing back toward Silvervale's capital, to regroup and reconsider his position. The soldiers who had knelt before Elira remained, forming what would become the foundation of her own growing support within Silvervale's territory. That evening, as the sun set over the valley where everything had changed, Elira stood beside Cale, watching Silvervale's newly loyal soldiers make camp nearby, preparing for whatever challenges still lay ahead in reclaiming the throne fully. You did something remarkable today, Cale said quietly, watching her with unmistakable pride and something deeper, steadier, that had grown between them through every trial they'd faced together. We did it together, Elira corrected gently. I couldn't have done any of this alone, Cale. Not the ambush, not the right, not today's confrontation. You've stood beside me through every step. And I intend to continue standing beside you, Cale said, turning to face her fully, through whatever comes next, whether that means helping you reclaim Silvervale's throne entirely, or building whatever future you choose beyond it. Elira smiled, feeling the weight of everything she'd endured, the humiliation at the ball, the terror of the ambush, the uncertainty of the right, finally settling into something steadier, something resembling genuine peace. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his without hesitation, the Ashgrove ring catching the last light of the setting sun. Then let's build that future, she said, together, as equals, whatever crown either of us chooses to carry. In the weeks that followed, word of Corwin's crumbling authority spread rapidly through Silvervale's territory, more soldiers and citizens alike coming forward to pledge loyalty to Celine's daughter. Once details of the old regent's betrayal became widely known, Corwin himself was eventually captured attempting to flee across Silvervale's northern border, brought before a formal council to answer for his crimes at last. Elira was formally crowned Silvervale's rightful ruler months later, in a ceremony attended by wolves from every allied territory, including, standing proudly beside her throughout, the Alpha King, who had once defended a humiliated Omega girl at a ball, meant only for choosing brides. Seraphine attended as well, her apology from months earlier, proven genuine through consistent, quiet acts of kindness that had slowly rebuilt whatever fragile trust could exist between them. And when the ceremony concluded, when the crown finally settled upon her head, Elira looked out across the gathered crowd, remembering every moment of doubt, every whispered cruelty, every instant she had believed herself unworthy of anything beyond quiet servitude. She was not that girl any longer. She never truly had been, not really, though it had taken every trial of this journey to finally understand her own worth, proven not by bloodline or crown, but by the quiet strength she had carried within herself all along.